Get him off my property. HOA President Karen Mitchell barked the order like a judge handing down a sentence, not like a neighborhood volunteer abusing a little power. Two private security guards grabbed my 78-year-old father by the arms and hauled him off the front porch of the house he'd built with his own hands 42 years earlier. His cane clattered onto the concrete. His keys slipped from his pocket. Karen strolled over, kicked the keys into the flower bed, and waved forward a locksmith waiting in the driveway. "Change every lock," she ordered. "He's no longer welcome here." My father looked her straight in the eye. "Do you have a court order?" Karen smirked. "I don't need one. The HOA makes the rules." Then she turned to the gathering neighbors and raised her voice. "And if anyone helps him back into that house, you'll be hearing from me next." The street fell silent. Phones came out. Curtains opened, but no one dared challenge the woman, who'd spent nearly 2 years bullying Cedar Ridge with fines, threats, and intimidation. A minute later, my phone rang. Mrs. Collins, our elderly neighbor, was crying. "They threw your father into the street." I looked down at the documents sitting on the seat beside me. Less than 3 hours earlier, I'd signed the agreement selling my technology company for $1. $3 billion. Reporters were still waiting outside the conference room for interviews. I closed the folder. None of it mattered anymore. I gave my driver 5 words. "Take me to my father." Karen believed she'd just humiliated an old man who couldn't fight back. She had no idea she'd just declared war on the one person who could take apart everything she'd built before the sun went down. Before I tell you how Karen's little empire collapsed, you need to know why she picked my father as her target. Walter Hayes wasn't the kind of man who made enemies. At 78, he still lived alone in the same white 2-story house he'd built with my mother more than 4 decades earlier. A Vietnam veteran and a retired electrician, he was the neighbor everyone trusted. If someone's car wouldn't start, Dad was already crossing the lawn with his old red toolbox before they'd finished asking. Every Christmas, he strung lights for the elderly couple down the block. Every 4th of July, he raised the flag before sunrise. People respected him because he'd earned it. Karen hated him for exactly the same reason. Everything changed 18 months earlier when Karen Mitchell became president of the Cedar Ridge HOA. She promised to protect property values and drag the community into the future. At first, people applauded, assuming she meant prettier landscaping and tighter maintenance standards. Instead, she ruled by fear. Violation notices started appearing overnight. A family was fined because a pickup truck sat in the driveway too long. An elderly widow got a warning because her wind chimes counted as visual clutter. A retired Marine was ordered to take down the flag over his garage because it wasn't on the HOA's approved list of exterior decorations. Karen wasn't interested in keeping the neighborhood beautiful. She wanted everyone to remember who was in charge. She loved walking Cedar Ridge in expensive sunglasses, leather clipboard in hand. 2 board members trailing behind her like bodyguards, jotting down whatever she pointed at. Grass half an inch too tall, a faded mailbox, a flower pot she didn't like. If she could turn it into a violation, she would. Most homeowners stopped arguing. They paid the fines, apologized, and did whatever Karen wanted, because fighting the HOA cost more than giving in. My father refused, not because he liked conflict, but because he believed the rules applied to everyone, including the people enforcing them. Whenever Karen taped another notice to his door, Dad calmly took it down, highlighted the bylaw section she claimed he'd violated, and mailed back a certified letter asking her to point to exactly where that rule existed. Most of the time, it didn't. Karen never answered. She just sent another notice, then another. One afternoon, she walked onto his property uninvited and pointed at the old wooden porch swing my grandfather had built decades earlier. "That thing lowers property values," she said. Dad smiled politely. "My late wife loved that swing." Karen shrugged. "I don't care what your wife loved. The community deserves better." Mrs. Collins, watering flowers across the street, heard every word. So did several neighbors in their yards. No one said anything. Karen had spent too long convincing the neighborhood that crossing her wasn't worth the trouble. Walking back to her Lexus, she looked over her shoulder and left a warning. That sounded less like an HOA notice and more like a personal threat. You've embarrassed me in front of this board for the last time, Mr. Hayes. Next time I come back, you're leaving this house. Dad watched her drive off without a word. That evening he called me. He didn't sound scared. He sounded disappointed. I told him Karen was all talk. I couldn't have been more wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, Karen stopped pretending this was about HOA rules. It turned personal. Every few days, another orange violation notice showed up on my father's door. One claimed his mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Another said my mother's rose bushes counted as overgrown landscaping. Then came a notice about the flagpole. Supposedly, it extended a few inches past the HOA's approved specifications. Dad folded every notice, filed it in his blue box, and mailed back the same question each time. Please identify the specific bylaw authorizing this violation. Karen never answered. Instead, she escalated, showing up unannounced with 2 board members, walking the perimeter of the house, taking photos like it was a crime scene, measuring the grass, photographing the windows, counting the flower pots on the porch. One Saturday morning, Dad opened the door and found Karen halfway up his walkway. You really should consider selling, she said, casual as anything. Dad smiled. I'm not interested. You make a nice profit. I didn't build this house to flip it. Karen took off her sunglasses. People like you are holding this neighborhood back. Dad's smile disappeared. What exactly do you mean by people like me? She glanced around, making sure the neighbors could hear. People who won't move on. Old homes, old habits, old men. Cedar Ridge deserves residents who understand quality. Dad stood quietly a moment, then answered in the same calm voice I'd heard my whole life. I fought for this country before you were born. I paid every tax, every HOA fee, every mortgage payment. If anyone belongs here, I do. Karen's jaw tightened. I think she knew, right then, that she'd lost the argument. Not because Dad raised his voice, but because everyone watching knew he was right. She turned sharply to the board members. Take more pictures. They photographed the porch swing, the flower beds, the flag, even the wheelchair ramp Dad had built years earlier. When my mother got too weak to climb the steps during chemotherapy, Karen pointed straight at it. That addition was never approved. Mrs. Collins couldn't hold her tongue. Shame on you, she called from across the street. His wife was dying. Karen didn't even look at her. If you'd like to interfere with HOA business, Mrs. Collins, I can inspect your property next. The older woman went quiet immediately. That was Karen's real weapon. Fear. Not one homeowner believed she was right. They just didn't believe fighting her was worth what it would cost them. Climbing back into the Lexus, Karen rolled down the window and looked straight at my father. You've embarrassed this board for the last time. Next Friday morning, you won't be living here anymore. Dad watched the car disappear around the corner. That evening he called, but didn't mention the threat until we were about to hang up. Don't worry about it, he said with a quiet laugh. She's trying to scare an old man. I told him Karen had no legal authority to force him out of his own home. Neither of us knew she'd already decided the law didn't matter to her. At exactly 10:07 the following Friday morning, 3 vehicles pulled into my father's driveway. Karen's Lexus arrived first, followed by a black SUV from a private security company. Then a locksmith's van. It wasn't a coincidence. Karen had planned every minute of it. Mrs. Collins later told me she watched from her kitchen window as Karen stepped out in a crisp white blazer, clipboard in hand, looking almost excited. 2 guards followed her toward the porch while the locksmith waited by his van, toolbox ready. My father had been watering the rose bushes when they walked onto his property without knocking. Good morning, Mr. Hayes, Karen announced, loud enough for half the street to hear. This is your final compliance inspection. Dad set the hose down. I wasn't aware we had one scheduled. You don't schedule HOA enforcement. She held up a stack of papers. The board has determined your repeated violations constitute a serious threat to community standards. Dad glanced at the papers. I responded to every notice. You responded. You never complied. He folded his arms. Because none of them cited an actual rule. Karen ignored that and turned to the locksmith. Be ready. A chill went through everyone watching. Neighbors started stepping outside, pretending to check the mail or walk the dog while keeping their eyes on the house. They knew something was wrong. They just didn't know how far Karen would go. Dad took one slow step forward. "Karen, I'm asking one last time. Do you have a court order?" She smiled. "No." "Then this conversation is over." He turned toward his front door. Karen's voice went sharp. "Stop him." One guard stepped in front of Dad. "Sir, please remain where you are." "My house is behind you," Dad said calmly. "I'm going inside." "Remove him," Karen said. The guards hesitated. The older one looked uneasy. "Ma'am, we usually need legal paperwork before," I said. "Remove him." Not wanting to argue with the woman who'd hired them, the guards took hold of Dad's arms. He didn't fight. He just tried to pull free. In the struggle, his cane slipped from his hand. His foot caught the edge of the step, and he went down hard on one knee before collapsing onto the concrete. A gasp ran down the street. Mrs. Collins dropped her watering can. Another neighbor shouted, "He's an old man." Karen never even looked at his knee. She just pointed at the door. "Change the locks." The locksmith froze. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "Do it." While my father was still trying to get up, the locksmith reluctantly pulled the deadbolt. Karen bent down, scooped up the keys that had fallen from Dad's pocket, and tossed them into the flower bed. "You won't be needing these anymore." Then she turned to the crowd. "If anyone helps Mr. Hayes into this house, expect a violation notice by Monday." Nobody moved, not because they agreed with her, but because they were afraid of becoming her next target. At 10:19, Mrs. Collins locked her front door and called me with shaking hands. "They've thrown your father out of his own house." The only sound she heard on my end was the click of a briefcase closing. 3 hours earlier, I'd become a billionaire. Now I had something far more important to do. 28 minutes later, my car turned onto Cedar Ridge. The street looked exactly as I remembered it. Tree-lined, perfectly trimmed lawns, bicycles lined beside driveways. From a distance, it looked like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. Then I saw my father sitting quietly on Mrs. Collins's porch with an ice pack against his swollen knee. Kane leaning against the chair, hands scraped from trying to break his fall. For a moment, I didn't notice anything else. Not the crowd, not the locksmith, not even Karen. I walked straight to him. He looked up and managed a small smile. "I told Mrs. Collins not to bother you." I knelt beside him. "You should have bothered me sooner." He shook his head. "You had business." "No," I said, looking at the bandage on his arm. "This is my business." He reached for my hand, the way he used to when I was a kid. "I'm all right. They didn't beat me. They just forgot I was still standing in my own yard." Those words hit harder than anything else. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. I stood and walked across the street to my father's house. Karen noticed me right away. "You must be his son." "I am." She extended her hand, expecting respect. "Karen Mitchell, president of Cedar Ridge." "I know exactly who you are." Her smile faded. "I assume you're here to remove your father's belongings." "I'm here to find out who thought they had the authority to throw a legal homeowner into the street." Karen crossed her arms. "The HOA acted within its enforcement powers." "Really?" "Absolutely." I pointed at the brand new lock on the front door. "Who authorized that?" "The board." I asked who legally authorized it. "The HOA governing documents." "Show me the court order." She laughed. "We don't need one." The neighbors traded nervous glances. Some had never heard anyone challenge Karen so directly. Others quietly took out their phones again. I nodded once. "Thank you for what?" She asked. "For saying that in front of witnesses." Her confidence slipped for the first time. I made 3 phone calls. First to my attorney, then to the county sheriff, then to the title company that had handled my parents' property for more than 40 years. Karen rolled her eyes. "So you're bringing lawyers?" "I'm bringing facts." 15 minutes later, my attorney arrived with a thick leather portfolio. Without a word, he handed me certified copies of my father's property deed, the original survey, and the HOA's recorded governing documents on file with the county. Karen crossed her arms. "I already know what those documents say." My attorney looked at her calmly. "If you did, none of us would be standing here." He opened the declaration to a highlighted paragraph and read it aloud. "The association may issue notices, impose fines, and seek legal remedies through the courts. He paused. It may not remove occupants, replace locks, seize possession of a residence, or interfere with lawful ownership without a valid court order. The silence was immediate. Karen tried to push back. The board interprets. The board, my attorney said, does not outrank state property law. Before she could answer, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled into the driveway. Karen smiled with relief. Perfect. They're just in time to remove these people. The older deputy stepped out, listened to both sides without a word, then looked straight at Karen. Ma'am, can you show me the court order that authorized you to remove this homeowner from his own property? For the first time since it began, Karen had no answer. Her mouth opened twice before anything came out. There must be some misunderstanding. The deputy looked at her without a trace of sympathy. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you ordered private security onto private property, remove a lawful homeowner from his residence, and change his locks without a court order. Karen gestured at her clipboard as if it could save her. The HOA board approved everything. Then I'd suggest every member of that board find a good attorney. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Karen looked frightened. Not angry, not arrogant, frightened. The locksmith stepped forward quietly. Sir, if there's a problem, I can put the original locks back. There is a problem, the deputy said. And yes, you are. Within minutes, the new lock was gone, and my father's original was back on the door. One deputy peeled the orange notices off the entrance and bagged them as evidence. Another took statements from everyone who'd witnessed it. Mrs. Collins went first, then Mr. Ramirez, then the retired Marine Karen had fined over his flag. One by one, neighbors who'd spent months living in fear finally found their voices. The stories all sounded painfully familiar. Threats, selective enforcement, harassment, intimidation. Karen kept insisting she'd acted for the good of the community. The community standing around her no longer agreed. Even 2 board members quietly admitted they'd warned her that removing my father without a court order was illegal. She said nobody would challenge us. One confessed. She told us homeowners never fight back. The sheriff closed his notebook. I think she miscalculated. Before leaving, the deputies told Karen the incident would be forwarded to the county investigator and the district attorney and advised the HOA to preserve every email, meeting minute, financial record, and enforcement notice tied to the case. The confidence drained out of Karen's face. This wasn't ending with another violation letter. It was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, everything she'd built came apart. The HOA's insurance company refused to defend the board after reviewing the incident. An emergency community meeting packed the clubhouse until people were standing along the walls. Karen tried to defend herself. Almost no one applauded. Residents voted to remove her as president by an overwhelming margin. Several board members resigned that same night. The county opened an investigation into the association's enforcement practices, and dozens of homeowners went back and challenged fines they'd once been too afraid to contest. As for my father, he never celebrated Karen's downfall. The morning after the meeting, I found him on his porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun rise the way he had for decades. The rose bushes were still there. The old porch swing still creaked in the breeze. The oak tree my parents had planted when I was a child still shaded the front yard. Dad looked at me and smiled. You know, he said quietly, I was never afraid of losing the house. What scared me was watching good people get too afraid to stand up for each other. A week later, the neighbors gathered without anyone asking them to. Someone repaired the damaged fence. Someone else replanted the crushed flowers. Kids helped sweep the porch for the first time in a long while. Cedar Ridge felt like a neighborhood again, instead of a place run by fear. That day reminded me of something money can't buy. $1 billion can purchase almost anything, but it can't build a home. Only love, integrity, and the courage to stand up to a bully can do that. And in the end, that was something Karen never understood.